Sometimes the people who change the world are the very ones nobody notices until the world finally notices them first. Three black Cadillacs rolled slowly onto the cracked gravel outside Walker Auto Repair just after 8 o'clock on a cool Nebraska morning. Their polished paint reflected the rising sunlight like mirrors, completely out of place beside the faded blue garage where Ethan Walker had spent the last 15 years repairing pickup trucks, family sedans, and anything else that could still be saved with patience and honest work. The quiet town of Maple Ridge seemed to stop breathing. Customers waiting for oil changes looked away from their coffee. A farmer climbed out of his aging truck and removed his cap. Two mechanics froze with wrenches still in their hands. Even the old Labrador, sleeping beside the garage door, slowly lifted his head as the long line of luxury cars came to a gentle stop. Ethan wiped the grease from his hands with an old shop towel before walking toward the driveway. He was 41 years old, a widowed father raising his 9-year-old daughter alone, and there was nothing about his appearance that suggested he belonged in the same world as expensive executive cars. His blue work shirt carried the embroidered name of his small business. His work boots showed years of honest labor, and his weathered hands revealed thousands of hours spent helping strangers return safely to their families. He quietly wondered whether someone had brought the wrong address. The rear door of the first Cadillac opened. A tall blonde woman stepped onto the gravel wearing an elegant cream-colored coat over a tailored business dress. Her posture reflected confidence, yet her eyes carried an emotion that seemed far stronger than success. Several men in dark suits immediately surrounded her, but she gently raised one hand, asking them to remain where they stood. Without saying a single word, she walked directly toward Ethan. The distance between them seemed unusually long, as though every curious eye in town was silently measuring each step. Ethan offered a polite smile, unsure whether he had ever met her before. Before he could introduce himself, the woman stopped only a few feet away. Tears quietly filled her blue eyes. Then, without hesitation, she wrapped both arms around the surprised mechanic and held him tightly. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound came from a soft breeze passing through the cottonwood trees beside the garage. Ethan slowly lowered the shop towel, still resting in his hand, completely confused by the unexpected embrace. He carefully stepped back just enough to look in her face. The woman smiled through grateful tears before speaking words that would leave every person standing outside the garage in complete silence. "Because of you," she whispered, her voice trembling with gratitude, "my son is alive." Ethan stared at her, searching his memory. He had never met this woman before, at least not under clear skies and warm morning sunlight. Around them, the townspeople exchanged puzzled glances while the executives remained respectfully silent. The sheriff's patrol truck slowly pulled into the parking lot as though someone had anticipated this remarkable meeting. Ethan looked at the unfamiliar woman once more, still unable to understand why a stranger dressed like the leader of a global corporation would thank an ordinary mechanic for saving her child. The answer had begun 24 hours earlier, beneath a dark Nebraska sky where fierce rain, rising wind, and a sinking private jet would bring together two lives that should never have crossed paths, proving that the greatest miracles often begin with one quiet decision made by someone expecting nothing in return. 24 hours earlier, Maple Ridge looked exactly as it had for generations, peaceful enough that most people believed nothing extraordinary could ever happen there. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the quiet streets, while Ethan Walker unlocked the front door of Walker Auto Repair with the same worn brass key he had carried every morning for years. Before raising the garage door, he paused for a brief moment to breathe the cool Nebraska air and quietly appreciate another day that promised honest work. Inside the small house, only a few blocks away, his 9-year-old daughter Lily finished pouring cereal into 2 bowls before looking toward the kitchen window. "Dad, you're going to be late for breakfast," she called with a playful smile. Ethan laughed as he stepped inside and placed his toolbox beside the front door. "I have not missed breakfast with my favorite girl yet, and I am not planning to start today." They shared pancakes, fresh fruit, and simple conversation about school, science class, and Lily's newest dream of becoming an engineer one day. Ethan listened carefully to every word because he believed that children deserved to feel heard before they learned to face the world. After walking Lily to the neighborhood school bus, he returned to the garage where customers were already beginning to arrive. An elderly rancher needed help with an aging pickup truck that had carried 3 generations across thousands of miles of Nebraska farmland. Ethan examined the engine carefully before smiling. "You do not need a new transmission," he explained kindly. "A simple repair will solve the problem and save you several $1,000s." The rancher looked surprised. "Most shops would have sold me a replacement." Ethan simply shrugged. "You came here because you trusted me. I do not intend to waste that trust." The grateful customer shook Ethan's hand before driving away with genuine relief. Throughout the morning, neighbors stopped by not only because Ethan repaired vehicles well, but because they knew he always treated people with fairness and respect. Around noon, dark clouds slowly gathered beyond the western hills. The local radio station interrupted its music with a weather advisory warning that a powerful storm system was expected to move across the county before evening. Strong winds, heavy rain, and dangerous conditions near Silver Lake were all predicted. Several customers decided to leave early, hoping to reach home before the weather worsened. Ethan glanced toward the darkening sky for a long moment before quietly walking into a storage room at the back of the garage. Hanging neatly on the wall was an orange waterproof rescue jacket, a coiled rope, and a first aid backpack. Years earlier, after losing his wife to illness, Ethan had volunteered with the County Water Rescue Program because he wanted to help protect other families from unexpected tragedy whenever he could. He carefully checked the contents of the emergency bag, replaced a flashlight battery, and returned everything to its place without saying a word to anyone. He never expected praise for being prepared. To him, responsibility was simply another form of kindness. As afternoon settled over Maple Ridge, the wind gradually strengthened, tree branches began swaying across quiet streets, and the peaceful rhythm of the small town slowly gave way to an uneasy silence. Hundreds of feet above those darkening clouds, a sleek private jet carrying one of the nation's most powerful business leaders had already begun encountering weather that no passenger aboard would ever forget. The first clap of thunder rolled across Maple Ridge just after 4 o'clock, deep enough to rattle the windows of Walker Auto Repair and send every customer glancing toward the darkening sky. Rain began falling in heavy sheets, turning quiet country roads into ribbons of shining pavement, while powerful winds swept across open farmland. Ethan Walker finished lowering the hood of a customer's pickup truck just as the emergency weather alert sounded again over the local radio. Severe thunderstorm warning for Silver Lake and surrounding areas. Residents are advised to avoid unnecessary travel. He quietly removed his work gloves and looked toward the distant shoreline barely visible beyond the trees. Something about the rapidly changing weather unsettled him. Moments later, an unfamiliar sound echoed through the storm. It was not thunder. It was the strained roar of jet engines flying far lower than they ever should above the small town. Ethan stepped outside into the rain, shielding his eyes against the wind as several neighbors also looked upward. Through the thick gray clouds, the outline of a sleek private jet briefly appeared before disappearing again behind curtains of rain. The aircraft seemed unstable, descending far too quickly while struggling against violent gusts. Somewhere overhead, experienced pilots were doing everything possible to keep everyone aboard safe. But even from the ground, Ethan could tell the situation had become critical. A distant splash echoed across the countryside, followed by an eerie silence that lasted only a heartbeat before emergency sirens began sounding from every direction. One of Ethan's mechanics ran outside. Did that plane just go down? Ethan had already reached for the orange rescue jacket hanging beside the garage entrance. "Call 911 and tell them I am heading to Silver Lake," he answered calmly. "Tell them Volunteer Water Rescue is responding." Without wasting another second, he grabbed the waterproof first aid backpack, coiled rescue rope, and climbed into his aging pickup truck. Rain hammered the windshield as he drove the familiar 7-mile route toward the lake, passing sheriff deputies, volunteer firefighters, and local residents already rushing toward the same destination. By the time Ethan reached the public boat launch, dozens of people had gathered despite the dangerous weather. The private jet floated partially above the surface near the shoreline, its tail still visible while waves pushed relentlessly against the damaged fuselage. Several passengers wearing life vests had already been helped onto rescue boats by nearby fishermen who had reached the scene first. Firefighters prepared additional equipment, while paramedics established a treatment area beneath portable shelters. Ethan quickly secured the rescue rope around his waist before joining the nearest volunteer crew. Together, they guided frightened passengers toward waiting responders through cold water and relentless rain. One exhausted flight attendant, wrapped in a thermal blanket, suddenly grabbed Ethan's sleeve before he could step away. Her voice trembled with urgency. "Please," she said, struggling to catch her breath. "Our chief executive officer is still inside." She refused to leave. She went back for something important. Ethan looked toward the slowly sinking aircraft as another wave crashed against its side. There was no hesitation in his eyes. He tightened the rescue rope around his waist, nodded once toward the firefighters holding the safety line, and moved steadily through the rising water toward the open cabin door, knowing only that somewhere inside a frightened stranger still believed something was worth risking everything to protect. Cold rain soaked Ethan Walker's rescue jacket as he reached the partially submerged cabin, gripping the frame of the open doorway, while powerful waves rocked the aircraft against the dark water. Every movement demanded patience instead of panic. He took one steady breath before climbing inside. Emergency lights flickered faintly across the narrow aisle, casting long reflections over scattered luggage and empty seats. "Is anyone still here?" he called with calm determination. At first, there was only the sound of rain striking the aircraft and water slowly rising across the cabin floor. Then a woman's voice answered from farther inside. "Please, I cannot leave without it." Ethan followed the voice toward the rear of the cabin, where he found a blonde woman kneeling beside a seat, struggling to pull a small waterproof briefcase free from beneath twisted luggage. She looked exhausted, but completely focused on protecting the case. "We have to go now," Ethan said firmly while extending his hand. The woman looked up, her blue eyes filled with determination rather than fear. "I know how this looks," she replied softly, "but I cannot leave this behind." Ethan glanced at the compact black case before helping lift the heavy luggage away from it. He assumed it contained confidential business documents or valuable company records. Whatever the reason, he could see that it mattered deeply to her. Once the case came free, she held it tightly against her chest. Ethan immediately guided her toward the exit, carefully supporting her balance as cold lake water continued creeping higher through the cabin. The aircraft shifted again beneath another strong wave, reminding them that every second mattered. "Stay close to me," Ethan said. "Do not let go of my arm." She nodded without argument. Together, they moved slowly through the narrow aisle until they reached the open doorway where wind and rain greeted them once again. Outside, volunteer firefighters tightened the safety rope while rescue crews called encouragement across the water. Ethan secured the woman to the rescue line before stepping carefully into the lake beside her. The cold water reached their shoulders as they advanced toward the waiting rescue boat, one careful step at a time. Several times the woman stumbled against unseen debris beneath the surface, but Ethan remained steady, helping her regain her footing without rushing. His calm voice never changed. "You're doing well. Just keep looking at the shoreline." Those simple words became an anchor stronger than the rescue rope itself. Minutes later, they reached the firefighters waiting at the edge of the lake. Two paramedics immediately helped the exhausted woman onto a rescue boat, while Ethan climbed aboard behind her. As they wrapped a warm blanket around her shoulders, she looked back toward the mechanic who had quietly guided her to safety. "I never even asked your name," she said with sincere gratitude. Ethan smiled gently while removing his soaked gloves. "My name is Ethan Walker," he answered. "You are safe now. That is what matters." Before she could thank him again, paramedics hurried her toward an ambulance for evaluation. In the rush of flashing lights, concerned responders, and relentless rain, neither of them realized that the waterproof case she had refused to abandon contained far more than corporate documents. Inside were confidential medical records confirming a long-awaited pregnancy, along with ultrasound photographs that represented the greatest hope she had ever carried into the future. The storm finally drifted east during the night, leaving Silver Lake quiet once again, but the events of the rescue continued unfolding inside Maple Ridge Regional Medical Center. Victoria Sterling slowly opened her eyes to the soft glow of morning sunlight filtering through the hospital window. For a brief moment, she stared at the ceiling, trying to separate memory from reality, until the steady rhythm of a heart monitor reminded her that she had survived. A physician entered the room with a warm smile and a calm voice that immediately eased the concern on her face. "Miss Sterling, we completed every examination we felt was necessary. You experienced a very stressful accident, but I have good news. Your condition is stable, and your pregnancy appears healthy. Everything we can evaluate today is encouraging." Victoria closed her eyes as quiet tears rolled down her cheeks, this time not from fear, but from overwhelming relief. She placed one hand gently over her abdomen and whispered a simple thank you before taking a slow breath. Moments later, her executive assistant, Caroline Brooks, hurried into the room carrying the waterproof briefcase that had already become the subject of countless conversations among emergency responders. "Everything inside was protected," Caroline said. "Your medical records, the ultrasound photographs, and every important document are completely safe." Victoria nodded gratefully before asking the question that mattered even more. "What about the man who rescued me?" Caroline exchanged a quick glance with the physician. "The rescue reports only identify him as Ethan Walker. He left before anyone could properly thank him." Victoria looked toward the window in thoughtful silence. She remembered his steady voice cutting through the wind, his patient guidance through the cold water, and the quiet confidence that never disappeared even when every second mattered. She realized she had trusted a complete stranger without hesitation because kindness carried its own unmistakable certainty. "Find him," she said softly. "Not because I owe him money, because I owe him my gratitude." Caroline immediately contacted the county sheriff, local firefighters, and emergency management officials, but none of them knew much beyond Ethan's name and that he had volunteered during the rescue before quietly returning home. The sheriff smiled while reviewing the reports. "That sounds exactly like Ethan Walker. He helps whenever people need him, then goes back to work before anyone starts talking about him." Across town, Ethan unlocked Walker Auto Repair as though the previous evening had been completely ordinary. He swept the garage floor, organized his tools, and greeted his first customer with the same friendly smile he offered every morning. Lily stopped by before school to hand him a paper lunch bag she had packed herself. "Do not forget to eat today," she reminded him. Ethan laughed gently. "Yes, ma'am." Neither father nor daughter had any idea that television stations across Nebraska were already reporting on the remarkable rescue at Silver Lake, or that one of the nation's most influential business leaders had made only one request after waking in hospital. She did not ask about her company. She did not ask about the damaged aircraft. She asked every official the same quiet question. "Where can I find the mechanic who saved my child before he even knew my child existed?" By the following morning, Walker Auto Repair had returned to its familiar rhythm. The sound of air compressors, humming engines, and friendly conversations once again filled the small garage as Ethan Walker worked beneath the hood of an aging family sedan. To everyone around him, it was simply another ordinary day. He had never mentioned the rescue to his customers because he believed helping someone in danger did not deserve applause. It was simply the right thing to do. Just after 8 o'clock, the low rumble of powerful engines echoed down the quiet street. One by one, 3 polished black Cadillacs turned into the gravel driveway and stopped in perfect formation outside the garage. The sudden arrival drew the attention of everyone nearby. Store owners stepped onto the sidewalk. A school crossing guard paused in the middle of the intersection. Customers waiting inside the garage quietly walked toward the open bay doors, wondering why such an impressive motorcade had come to a town where nothing remarkable ever seemed to happen. Ethan slowly wiped the grease from his hands with a clean shop towel before walking outside. He assumed someone had taken a wrong turn. The rear door of the first Cadillac opened, and Victoria Sterling stepped onto the gravel wearing a simple cream-colored coat instead of the formal business attire expected from one of the nation's most successful chief executive officers. Her expression held neither pride nor authority. It held gratitude. Several security professionals instinctively moved with her, but she gently asked them to remain behind. She wanted to cross the final few steps. Alone. Ethan recognized her immediately. Relief quietly spread across his face. "It is good to see you standing," he said with a warm smile. "The doctors took excellent care of you." Victoria's eyes filled with emotion. "They did," she replied softly. "But they could only help me because you brought me back." Before anyone could say another word, she embraced Ethan with sincere gratitude. The entire street fell silent. People who had gathered expecting an important business meeting instead witnessed something far more meaningful. When Victoria stepped back, she reached in her coat pocket and carefully unfolded a cashier's check. "This cannot repay what you did," she said. "Nothing ever could, but I hope you will accept it as a beginning." Ethan glanced at the amount for only a brief moment before gently folding the check closed and placing it back into her hand. Victoria looked at him with quiet surprise. "You are turning it down?" Ethan nodded respectfully. "I did not climb into that airplane because I expected a reward. I saw someone who needed help. I hope anyone would have done the same for my family." Around them, not a single person spoke. Even the executives who negotiated billion-dollar agreements for a living seemed unable to find words. Victoria studied the mechanic standing before her and realized she had encountered something that wealth could never purchase and power could never command. She slowly lowered the untouched check and smiled with genuine admiration. "Then allow me to thank you in a way that honors who you truly are," she said. Ethan looked at her with quiet curiosity, unaware that her next decision would not simply change his life. It would leave a lasting mark on every family that would one day call Maple Ridge home. Victoria Sterling looked around the quiet garage before speaking again, her voice gentle enough that everyone standing nearby instinctively leaned closer to hear. "There is something you still do not know," she said as she rested one hand over her heart. "When you reached me inside that airplane, I was not protecting financial records. I was protecting the first ultrasound photographs of my baby. Those documents represented the greatest blessing I have ever received, and I thought I was going to lose them forever." Ethan remained silent, allowing her words to settle over the gathering crowd. Victoria smiled through grateful tears before continuing. "Yesterday morning, my physician confirmed that my pregnancy is healthy. My child is alive because you refuse to leave anyone behind." The words seemed to suspend time itself. Customers lowered their eyes with quiet respect, while the mechanics, standing inside the garage, exchanged thoughtful glances. Ethan looked genuinely surprised. He had never imagined that one decision made during a storm had protected not only a stranger, but also the future she carried. After a long moment, he answered with the same humility that had guided every choice in his life. "I am grateful that both of you are safe. That is more than enough for me." Victoria slowly shook her head. "No, Ethan. You gave my child a second chance before either of us had the opportunity to meet him. Gratitude like that cannot simply disappear after one conversation." She carefully folded the untouched cashier's check and placed it back inside her coat pocket. "If you will not accept money for yourself, then I will honor your values instead." Ethan listened quietly as she continued. "Yesterday, while recovering in the hospital, I asked everyone the same question. They all told me the same story about you. They said you fix only what needs fixing. They said you charge people fairly. They said you volunteer whenever someone needs help. They said you never ask for recognition." The county sheriff nodded with a warm smile. "Every word of that is true." Victoria turned toward the people gathered outside the garage. "A community becomes strong because of people like Ethan Walker. They remind us that character is measured by what we quietly choose to do when nobody is watching. She then looked back at Ethan. I would like to establish a rescue and emergency response center here in Maple Ridge. It will provide equipment, volunteer training, water safety education, and emergency resources for families throughout the county. I want it built in honor of the values you demonstrated on that stormy evening. Ethan looked almost overwhelmed by the proposal. You do not need to name anything after me, he answered gently. Victoria Ismail, this is not about honoring one person. It is about making certain that your kindness continues saving lives long after both of us are gone. At that moment, Lily stepped off her school bus earlier than expected because classes had ended for a teacher training afternoon. She walked toward the garage, carrying her backpack, and immediately noticed the unusual gathering. Ethan smiled as she approached. Lily, I would like you to meet someone very special. Victoria knelt to Lily's eye level and warmly introduced herself. Your father reminded me that the strongest people are often the quietest. I hope my son grows up with the same kind of courage. Lily looked proudly at her father, who simply smiled with humble embarrassment, never realizing that his greatest lesson had never been spoken aloud. It had always been lived. The weeks that followed brought a different kind of excitement to Maple Ridge, one built not on headlines or publicity, but on quiet purpose. Surveyors arrived first, carefully measuring an empty piece of land overlooking Silver Lake where children often gathered to fish with their parents during the summer. Soon afterward, architects, engineers, and construction crews joined local volunteers to transform the peaceful hillside into something the town had never imagined possible. A simple sign stood near the entrance throughout the project. It did not display the name of a corporation or celebrate financial success. Instead, it carried a single sentence that reflected the spirit behind every beam and every brick. Built to protect families through kindness, preparation, and courage. Ethan Walker continued opening his garage every morning before sunrise exactly as he always had. Customers still arrived with noisy engines and worn tires, and he treated every person with the same honesty that had earned their trust long before anyone outside Nebraska knew his name. Occasionally, construction workers stopped by for repairs, and Ethan never charged them extra simply because the project had become famous. To him, fairness was not something reserved for extraordinary moments. It belonged in ordinary ones as well. Victoria Sterling visited Maple Ridge often, but she came without television cameras or formal ceremonies. She preferred walking through the construction site wearing a simple safety helmet, speaking with carpenters, electricians, and volunteers one by one. She listened to their ideas, thanked them personally, and often reminded everyone that buildings alone could never save lives. People did. The center would simply give good people the tools to help one another when difficult days arrived. Lily quickly became one of the project's most enthusiastic visitors. After finishing her homework, she often rode her bicycle to the site where volunteer instructors showed local children basic water safety, emergency communication, and first aid. She practiced tying rescue knots with bright orange ropes and learned how calm thinking could become just as important as physical strength during an emergency. Watching his daughter grow more confident each week filled Ethan with quiet gratitude. One afternoon, Victoria handed Lily a small notebook embossed with the emblem of Sterling Aerospace. This is for your dreams, she said warmly. Write down every invention you hope to build someday. The world always needs thoughtful engineers. Lily smiled brightly before asking, Do you really think I could do something that important? Victoria glanced toward Ethan before answering. Your father already taught you the most important lesson. Skills can be learned. Character must be chosen. Those words stayed with Lily long after the conversation ended. By early autumn, the rescue center stood complete against the golden Nebraska landscape. Modern classrooms, emergency equipment, rescue boats, and volunteer training facilities filled the campus. But what impressed visitors most was the atmosphere inside. There was no sense of pride or prestige. There was only a shared commitment to serving others with humility. As the final inspection concluded, the county sheriff quietly walked beside Ethan and smiled. One act of kindness brought all of this here. Ethan looked across the grounds where families laughed together under clear blue skies and children explored rescue equipment with wide eyes. He gently shook his head. Kindness did not build this place alone, he replied. Gratitude did. When grateful hearts choose to serve instead of simply remembering, entire communities become stronger. Standing nearby, Victoria heard every word. And in that peaceful moment, she understood that the greatest investment she would ever make had never been measured in dollars. It had been measured in the lives that would one day return safely home. 1 year later, the first rays of morning sunlight settled gently across the Walker Community Rescue Center as volunteers prepared for another weekend of safety training along the peaceful shoreline of Silver Lake. The building had already become a trusted place where families learned emergency skills, teenagers discovered the value of serving others, and neighbors came together with a shared purpose that reached far beyond themselves. Stories of lives protected through the center's programs quietly spread throughout Nebraska, but inside Maple Ridge, the people simply called it part of home. Ethan Walker still unlocked the doors of Walker Auto Repair every morning before sunrise with the same worn brass key he had carried for years. His work shirt was still stained with honest labor. His hands still carried the marks of countless repairs, and his greatest concern each day remained making certain every customer drove home safely. Success had never changed him because character had never depended on circumstances. After closing the garage that afternoon, Ethan walked toward the rescue center where families had gathered for the annual community appreciation picnic. Children laughed as they practiced throwing rescue ropes across the grass, while volunteer instructors patiently encouraged each successful attempt. Nearby, Lily proudly demonstrated a first aid lesson to younger students with confidence that reflected everything she had learned during the past year. Ethan watched quietly from beneath the shade of a large oak tree, realizing that kindness had grown into something much larger than one. Unforgettable evening on the lake. Moments later, 3 familiar black Cadillacs entered the parking area, but this time no one looked surprised. They had become welcome visitors in Maple Ridge. Victoria Sterling stepped out carrying a smiling baby boy in her arms, while several members of her team followed at a respectful distance. The child reached curiously toward the colorful balloons decorating the entrance as Victoria walked directly toward Ethan. "I would like you to meet James," she said with a warm smile. 1 year ago, he had not yet entered this world. Today, he is healthy, curious, and already determined to explore everything around him. Ethan gently touched the little boy's tiny hand, and James responded with a joyful laugh that instantly brought smiles to everyone nearby. For a long moment, neither adult spoke. Words seemed unnecessary because gratitude had already said everything that mattered. Victoria finally broke the comfortable silence. "Every birthday he celebrates will remind me that hope sometimes arrives wearing muddy work boots instead of expensive shoes." Ethan smiled modestly before looking toward Lily, who was helping another child master a simple rescue knot. "The greatest reward has always been seeing people take care of one another," he answered softly. As the afternoon sun slowly settled across the lake, families gathered together for a photograph outside the rescue center. Volunteers stood beside firefighters, mechanics beside business leaders, children beside grandparents, all smiling not because they had witnessed a miracle, but because they had become part of one. The camera captured a simple moment that would later hang inside the entrance hall for generations to come. Visitors often paused to admire the photograph, yet many overlooked the quiet mechanic standing near the back with grease still visible beneath his fingernails. Those who knew the story understood something far more important than recognition. Real dignity never demands attention. Real grace never keeps score. And the strongest legacy a person can leave behind is not measured by wealth, titles, or applause, but by the quiet choice to help someone else without expecting anything in return, trusting that goodness always finds its way home.